Welcome everyone to this webinar, this new edition of this webinar about software development. So at Multi Productions, we create webinars and there's more and more webinars that are coming up in the next weeks and months. So feel free to um, join us or subscribe to our YouTube channel. So today, this webinar is for business analysts who are more like on the manager side. So we're going to talk about creating a roadmap as a product owner in an agile um, software development context. So setting up a roadmap. Um, in an agile context, we will do the analysis as we go. So the business analysis is the art of thinking about what is it that we are going to build as software developers. So when you have a software project, you need to think about what are the requirements for this software project. And in the waterfall methodology, um, we are going to do all the analysis before. We'll do the business analysis, set up the requirements, like what are the functional requirements and the non-functional requirements. Um, so I'm going to tell you more about this soon. And then also you do the software architecture from the start. And then you start building it once you have an estimate of how much time it's going to take. But in my experience, the waterfall methodology is very suitable for building a bridge or like a road because you have a finite amount of material to build a road with, and you need to order the right amount of material and so on. But with software projects, maybe this is slightly less suitable because there might be um, there might be changes in the requirements because the clients or stakeholders like change their mind, and so they like to change their mind, and also the fact that we're building a digital project will make it very easy to change the requirements as we go. So maybe the agile methodologies are more suitable for software projects than the waterfall model. So in an agile project management context, we will allow ourselves to change our mind and be flexible with the requirements. Though that doesn't mean to be, neglecting our requirements from the start. We will do, as business analysts, we will do a great job of figuring out what are the requirements exactly for the team to build. But then we will still allow the stakeholder to change their mind. But each time the stakeholder change their mind and do a pivot, maybe change the priority of the requirements or the quality of the requirements, each time they do that, it will cost some more time. So in the end, it's the stakeholder who's paying for the project usually. So each time they change their mind, it will cost them money. So we don't want them to change their mind too much. So, in a waterfall project, we will estimate how much time it will take, and then we will do a quote and say, okay, we're going to charge you $100,000 for your website, for example. And then the client is going to say yes or no to this detailed um, analysis of the project to build. But with Agile, we are just going to say, oh, we're charging you, I don't know, 100 hours per sprint or 400 hours per sprint. And we're going to do 1 week or 2 week or 4 weeks, like 1 month long sprints. And then we're going to do as much as we can during that sprint duration towards the sprint goal. So let's get started and let's create a roadmap. That's the content of the project today, of the webinar today. So let me clean this up. Okay. So we're starting with value proposition. So there's a client who brought us this value proposition. So this is just an example, okay? The client is coming up with, or stakeholder is coming up with this, like our website helps people who cook at home, who want to share recipes with other people by creating their own recipes and searching for recipes by ingredient or their friend's profile. So the stakeholder comes up with this value proposition, and that's great. That's not so bad. I mean, there is some important things to take into account in your requirements. So you want to take this and split that into user stories. So user stories are basically we're doing a divide and conquer strategy. So we're trying to um, create um, small increments of work. So we're going to write user stories so that developers can know what they are developing. So you are going to say something like this, like and then you say, okay, the role of the person, maybe a user or like a user who cooks at home. I want to be able to, create a recipe so that other people can read my recipe and cook it at home. So that's actually a good user story for my example. So let's do this. Um, let's talk about the user story a bit. So so that I can the goal, that's very important because that's where the value lies. So that's where your user story creates value. And also there's another thing here. Um, you want to use a active verb, like be able to create a recipe. So let's get started. So I'm going to create a roadmap using just a spreadsheet. Um, so this is a simple template for a roadmap. Maybe you can move that roadmap into a markdown file or any other file. And we are not going to estimate how much effort this is or how much time it's going to take. This is going to be done with the developers, with the team. So that's not your job as a business analyst to estimate how much work this is. It's the Scrum Master with the rest of the developer team who will estimate how much time or how much effort it will take. And you don't know, you don't want to estimate too much. So I'm gonna go ahead and create epics. Um, so an epic is like a bigger user story that can contain more smaller user stories. So let's take this value proposition and chop it into finer grains, and we're going to take our knife and cut slices into it so that we can cook with smaller ingredients and divide the work into small work increment that a team of 8 developers can do, for example. So I guess the first user story would be like a website. We need a website. So that's a non-functional requirement, but we're going to express it as a user stories anyways. So functional requirements are about like an action that the user will do, and non-functional requirements are about like a quality of the system. For example, if I want my system to support 1 million users. That's a non-functional requirement about performance. So I guess like view a website. Oops, sorry. What happened? Okay. So view a website, right? I guess that's kind of the first user story. What else? Let me make this slightly smaller. Um, what other user stories can we think of? Cook. Okay, so we share recipe. So I guess create a recipe, right? So that's a it has an action verb um, and a I know it's users want to create a recipe. I guess share a recipe or making a recipe public, but then um, I guess part of that epic there are more smaller user stories like we have the CRUD create, read, update, and delete. So create a recipe. That's a part of this um, bigger epic. And I guess the next one would be like delete my recipe. Uh, view the list, view my list of recipes. What else? Like at this point, you just let your mind go and think of things. So create, read, delete. Oh, update. I want to be able to update my recipe, and then maybe view someone else's someone else's recipe. Okay, this is all part of this epic. So um, you know these all these user stories are part of this bigger story, bigger epic. And then maybe I can rename those so that they don't have the same name, like maybe create a new recipe. I don't know. Then view someone else's recipes or view all recipes on the website or view all recipes and then search for recipes using full text form search, right?
Modify my recipe.
Yeah, update my recipe.
Oh, yeah, sure. Sorry.
Maybe I will. Thank you for bringing that up. I renamed it. Like we want this to be very easy to understand. So if modify is easier than update, you should use modify. You want the developers and the stakeholder to be able to read this right away and understand. Um, and then I think this user story here, search for recipes. I think that's part of another epic. That's definitely a lot of work. Um, you can ask your software developer team. Uh, they will tell you, oh, this is this is the big user story. You will need to split that user story into smaller tasks, technical tasks like setting up the database or setting up the search engine optimized database uh, system or that kind of stuff. You will need to break that into smaller tasks, but you will do that with the team when you do the backlog grooming or the backlog inspection before the sprint planning sessions. If you do Scrum, if you do Kanban, you don't need to do sprint plannings. you just go with the flow, but you still need to check with your team to evaluate if it's doable or not. That's the team, the developer team who will help you with that. Now let's go back to our text. We have share recipes. Oh, share recipes. That's I guess that's another epic. Um, and maybe this one. I'm just going to duplicate this. Share recipes. So oh my God, that's a big epic. Maybe for now, maybe I want to make my um, set my recipe as private. You know, maybe I want to decide if I want the user to be able to decide if they want to make their recipe private or public. So that would be a way to do it. Okay. As a business analyst, your job will be to write the detailed criteria for this user story. But and then at this point, you will need to say, oh, I want to be able to set my recipe as private. So you will need to provide the details, like what the user is going to click, what's the name of the field and everything. And you can work with a UX designer for that part. But this is, I'm going to talk about that in another video. This is way too long for this webinar. So share recipes. So I want to set my recipe as private. Maybe I want to send my recipe to or invite another user to view my recipe. I don't know. I'm just thinking maybe share my recipe on Facebook. Um, that kind of stuff. I'm going to stop there. Let's continue to look at this value proposition. So with other people, okay, by creating their own recipes, yes, and searching for recipes by ingredient. Search for recipes. So I guess this is also part of this. I'm gonna add it to this epic here. Search for recipes. So search for recipes by ingredient. So I guess, you know, when you click on an ingredient, you can see a list um, of other stories, other recipes with the same ingredients. So this is just an example project, but you get the point. So you will need to specify all those things when you specify that user story. So I guess we want the user to navigate through the pages of a search result. You know, you want to, so that's, I guess that's another epic. So, you know, user stories in an epic can be separated into smaller epics. So I guess this would need to be separated, like there would be a story for going to the next page, going to the previous page, but I'm not going to do this here. You will do that in the next step that I will cover in a few minutes, like creating a text file for the user, the details of the user stories. And let's get finished with the roadmap first. So search by ingredients, okay, or their friend's profile. So, that's another big epic here. So this epic is, I guess, having friends, like adding friends. So I think maybe to make things simpler, following another user, like friends. Maybe I'm going to do a follow thing because friends needs the other person to accept my friendship. So maybe I'm just going to do following. So if you decide that, you need to check with your stakeholder. You need to check with the client. Like, is it okay if we do follow instead of friend? You know, friending people. So You need to check with your stakeholders. So I'm just going to do that for now. So, oh, I want to use an action verb. So follow another user. So follow another user, and then unfollow. I guess that's part of this epic. And then list all users I follow, you, who, another user follows. Okay, I'm gonna stop there. So there's more you can think about, I'm sure, but let's just create a little bit of order in that roadmap. So we are going to sort all those epics from the most essential to the least essential. Like we have maybe essential, nice to have, and so on. And also, maybe I'm gonna add a few more non-functional requirements for this viewer website. Maybe I'm going to do like support 1 million visitors at the same time. So that's a non-functional requirement. Okay. So I'm going to create here a priority thing. So there's some user stories or epics that are essential. Like I think this is essential. These are all essentials. Oops. Is this someone? Yeah, that's essential. View all recipes for the whole website. Yeah. I guess I guess that we'll also need the paging for the whole web. Um, Maybe I'm gonna um, navigate through the pages of oops, all the recipes. So I think this is essential. Well, viewing all recipes, yeah, why not? Why not? Maybe I think this is not nice to have, but I guess this is less essential than just viewing all. So maybe for I'm going to create some phases like, um, so I guess this is less prioritized than that, than like those one essential priority are, I want them in the MVP. So we're going to create phases. So MVP stands for minimum viable product. So maybe I first want to create a proof of concept. So POC. So I want all these things for the proof of concept. So that will be my first, my phase 0. And then maybe for the MVP, I really want this feature to be in. So maybe I'm gonna, yeah, it's still essential, but it can go in the next phase for the MVP. This can go support 1 million visitor. I think this is for definitely later. Later. So I'm going to how I can. I will need to move this row lower. I'm not able to do it right now, but maybe I can just do it like that. Um, and then you're gonna go on like search for recipe, full text search. I guess it's maybe I'm going to set it as nice to have. Searching for recipes by ingredient. This is um, this is kind of essential. I probably need to create ingredients. So maybe maybe I need to create an ingredient. So, delete an ingredient. And then you need to think, oh, um, um, what if what do I do with the recipes that share this ingredient? You need to figure that out. So I think you get the point. So what what I want to focus on is that all your effort of specifying features in details, oops, should be focused on the first essential user stories. So you can, you know, whatever is nice to have, like these things here, sharing. I think these are mostly nice to have. Uh, maybe ingredient. The ingredient thing is essential though. So, um, or maybe I want to click on an ingredient. Um, wait, this is slightly confused. Um, ingredient. Um, so I don't know why the font is different, but anyway, um, what you will want to do is move all the essential rows to the top. Check with your stakeholder. You're the product owner, so you're responsible for the roadmap and the backlog, but you always need to check with your stakeholder, whoever is paying for the project or is deciding for the project. Maybe usually it's a group of people. Sometimes it's only one person. Sometimes it's you, but you're responsible of um, setting up this roadmap of user story. So now let's um, let's take one user story, like create a new recipe, and then we're going to um, write the details of that user story. So once you have a nice prioritized list of features, you need to start writing it down so that the developers know what to build and they will check your acceptance criteria for that user story. And they will create a software architecture, maybe some database schema, some sequence diagram, or like a UML class diagram, that kind of documentation. And then they will start actually coding it. So as a person who cooks at home, right, I want to be able to create a new recipe. Okay, just go like this. Um, so that I can share it with the other users in public. And you know, I think what I overlooked here was the login part. So you need to create a whole epic for logging in, creating a user, and that kind of stuff. Okay, but I don't want to get into all the details. I just want to show you the basic idea. So let's continue with the other users and the anonymous um, visitors on this website. Okay, so that's my user story statement. As a blah blah, I want to be able to blah blah so that I can blah 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 blah. Okay. Now we have some acceptance criteria. So I guess there's a form. You should use a wireframe um, tool such as Balsamic wireframes, or you can draw maybe on a whiteboard, but you need some kind of wireframe for the developers to know what it's going to look like. So acceptance criteria. So maybe there's um, each recipe has a title, some steps, some steps, and ingredient. Okay. Or maybe I can create 3 separate acceptance criteria. It's going to be easier. So each of these acceptance criteria need to be measurable. You really need to make sure that the developers can know whether or not they achieved, they've implemented this user story with while respecting your criteria. So each recipe has some steps to it. So maybe that's a text field, a long text field, right? Maybe that's a short text field. Okay. Um, so each recipe is linked to multiple ingredients. Okay. So of course, we'll need to create another user story for creating, deleting, editing, like modifying each ingredient individually. Okay. So that's a big epic there. But for now, we're just worried about creating a new recipe. I guess maybe only I need to be logged in in order to create a recipe. So anonymous users cannot um, create recipes. That's to be validated with your um, UX designer and or stakeholder. Okay. Um, Maybe also check with the software developer team to know if it's possible to do these things. What else do we need? So maybe there's a second part I'd like to add is the technical details. So these are the things that you want to check for. So and then the technical details, usually that's left to the software developer team to populate. So maybe they will um, add info here like create a database table that's called recipe and that has the following fields. And maybe they will write a microservice in Node.js or PHP or Java, and they will write it there. But I will leave it to them to populate these technical details. Unless you have some info already, so maybe maybe we want to use a MySQL table to store the info. Okay, so maybe you have maybe your DevOps, like the person responsible for deploying your application on the server, or sometimes called sysadmin, but in this case, more like a DevOps. Um, they will tell you, oh, we prefer a MySQL database and not a NoSQL database because creating migrations or transformations to that database is easier. So maybe that could be an acceptance criteria actually. Um, so the technical details are more like um, um, I guess your work is more around the acceptance criteria, and you can leave most of the technical details um, to the team. Like maybe I could say we could use a MySQL table for example. Um, okay, that's the skeleton of a user story, and then you could probably put a wireframe. So you would paste your wireframe image here, and maybe you have a mockup also. And the difference between a wireframe and a mockup is that the wireframe only focuses on UX design, like what is the user clicking on, or what text are they seeing, whereas the mockup is more detailed, like it has set of colors, maybe fonts that should be very similar to the mockup. Maybe you don't want to do a mockup. Maybe you can leave this to the team to decide and you can just go with wireframes. That's my preferred way to go. I let the team choose maybe a UI toolkit and they can use the default style and maybe modify it a little bit later. You can create change requests later. So um, maybe I'll put like a to-do here um, for later. So why is it that I've used Markdown? Um, that's because GitHub and the other like GitLab and Bitbucket, they all support Markdown. It's like the de facto standard way of putting some text in like these issue tracking systems. So I'm using Markdown here, and I'm using Atom. This editor has a um, here Markdown preview plugin package. So, uh-oh, there's a problem, but usually it should work. Like, yeah, there you go. So, you know, you can update your text on the left, and you see the um, the preview right away. Um, so, and you can create um, like sublists, uh, like this, right? Items. Maybe if there's some text, you should add a acceptance criteria about it. So use the text below. And then you can create another section here. Like I'm using these titled 3 styles. So maybe, you know, and you can use these triple backticks to delimitate like some text that will be formatted just like code. So enter um, the instruction to your recipe. You know, maybe there's some text here. So I like to provide the text like that, like okay. You should make it very easy for the developers to know what you're talking about. Okay, what are these texts for? You need, you know, the developers. They don't want to spend a lot of time trying to figure out what you were saying in your user story. They want to be able to know right away what it's about. So the more details you put, the better it is. Though there's a limit, like you shouldn't spend too much time on a single user story because you'll probably have 100 more user stories to prepare. Okay. Um, though you don't want your system to have too many user stories. Maybe a 20 user story is like a small project, but then if you have between 40 and 80, that's becoming pretty big. And more than that, it's like a huge project. So you don't want too many user stories because you also, there's always um, more ideas than time and resources. So um, you will fill in more details here as much as you can and put the wireframe. So yeah, there's always more ideas than time and resources. So yeah, there's always more to build than you have people, time, or money for. So your job is to prioritize these things according to what the stakeholder tells you. This is a great book uh, about user story mapping. It's really good. It has lots of images. Love it. And there's more. Um, I really like this book. This is a very small book. It's like only a 50 pages. It tells you everything about business analysis. Like your job is to do the strategic analysis and also work with the UX designer or do the UX design yourself. And then the developers do the implementation and the software architecture, but you should also help with the quality assurance and project management. And you need to adapt to the constraints of the real world. Um, and there's another book here, Agile and Iterative Development. This one is not so great. I mean, it compares like different methodologies, but I think Kanban and Scrum are best for today's reality of the team. Kanban, in Kanban, you don't need to estimate how much you're going to be able to do during a sprint. Whereas with Scrum, you should try to estimate with your team how much they can do during the next sprint. And as a product owner, it's your responsibility to come up with sprint duration. You decide how long is the sprint. Are we using Kanban or Scrum? You're the manager, so it's your job. Um, there's also business analysis for dummies. This is not so good. There's a lot of info. There's a few more books, but um, I think you should definitely get this one. It's great if you want a cheap book that has most of the info. And then now let me just cover the basics of Kanban versus Scrum. So with Kanban, you you do some backlog grooming. So backlog inspection or grooming is the act of looking at the user stories with the team, with the software developer team, and they will discuss like how they want to implement it. Maybe they need to do some research. Maybe they need to do a spike, which is a prototype, and you will create new tickets for all these things. And then once they have enough info, they will story point. They will estimate the complexity of the user story. So usually we use a Fibonacci sequence. So either 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13 points, or like 20, 40, 100, or question mark. So if it's more than 13, you should definitely break down a user story into smaller ones. So maybe you can split the user story, the ticket. Of course, you create tickets in GitHub or GitLab or Bitbucket for all of these user stories, and you prioritize them in the task board, and then you story point them. So 13 or less. 1 point represents either the complexity or the duration. So I highly recommend that you use complexity, where 1 is the smallest possible task, because developers will have a lot of overhead just to do a simple task. They need to resolve any Git conflicts or that kind of stuff. And also, they need to come up with an architecture, do the commit, push the commit. That's a lot of work just for doing a simple task. So you don't want to break the project into too small tasks that are too small. You want them to be around 3, 5, or 8 points usually. So once you have a roadmap, you are responsible for deciding in what order these tickets are in the roadmap. And maybe I can show you one of my open source project roadmap. So yeah, maybe I'm going to show you map. We don't use Scrum for MapMap because we're not we're not doing sprints. We just do Kanban. Go, Kanban requires less maturity from the team. Like Scrum is more suitable when you have a finite amount of hours to work with. Um, Usually with Scrum, you have a product backlog and a sprint backlog. And the product backlog is a prioritized list of tasks. So the one that's on top is the most, the one with the higher priority, probably the next one we're going to do. And the one at the bottom has least priority. And the icebox is for stuff that we don't have prioritized yet. Maybe it's a maybe later kind of um, container. In progress is for the tasks that are in progress, and in review is for when the developers do code reviews, and that's very important. Maybe I think I can show this dynamic like open source project. It has a product backlog and a sprint backlog. For this one, we're using Scrum. So we estimate with the team how much they can do. See all their points, like 5 points, 5 points, 13 points. These are, so there are some tasks in progress, and these are all user stories that have been that have criteria, and some are, there's epics, so you can say part of, and then this sharp number is a link to another user story. There's some technical details that have been um, decided with the team, and there's some labels. Labels are useful for to have more info. There's an estimate, like with ZenHub, we have points, milestone, that's for the sprint. Maybe it's part of a release, like MVP release or proof of concept. MVP stands for minimum viable product, by the way. So that should be one of your milestones, maybe. And maybe you have a version 1 milestone. Maybe there's someone that's a Nassimi, and it's in a column. So um, that's a product backlog. That's what you want. You want to create a product backlog in maybe a spreadsheet, and then maybe a markdown file, and then you want to paste those into actual backlog items in issue tracking system like Bitbucket, GitHub, or GitLab. And then once you do backlog grooming, uh, you want to with a Scrum, you just people are ready to you just have one product backlog. So backlog is a list of prioritized tasks and user stories. You know, with Kanban, developers are just allowed to just start working on the item as soon as it's in the to-do list. But with Scrum, it's slightly more complex. With Scrum, we estimate how much we can do during a sprint. So your sprint can be 1 week, 2 weeks, or 4 weeks typically. So you do the sprint planning. So you just sit down with the team and ask them how much they think they can do during the next week or the next month. And then every day you are going to do, or every second day maybe, stand-up meeting, daily stand-up, where the developers say what they've been working on, what they will work on next, and are they blocked? And what you want to know, well, of course, you want to build a shared understanding of what is the product you're building, but also you want to make sure that we're building the right thing and that we're progressing towards our sprint goal. So each sprint should have a goal. For example, having a minimum viable product of a recipe sharing website. And then you do a sprint retrospective. So that's a demo of a finished working increment. You really want to get done with something. You want to you want the developers to work on small work increments. Um, you you know you want to reduce lead time, so reduce the time between starting a task and finishing a task. You also want to make the work of everyone visible in the task board. So you want the tickets to be assigned to someone, to be in the right column. You want people to comment on the items when they move it from one column to another. And you want to reduce the amount of work in progress. So each developer should only do like one task, maybe two at a time, but not like five, because everyone will wait for them to get done before they can um, do their work. And then sprint retrospective, that's an introspective meeting in which we identify something we could make better in our sprint, in our methodology. Maybe you want to reduce the amount of work in progress or something. The team will come up with some um, ideas of things you could improve, and you guys will decide on a thing, and then maybe you can create a backlog item for that improvement and assign it to someone for following up. And being agile also means improving how we work and create great software together. I think that's it for today. That's a big topic, like creating a product roadmap and also using Scrum, using Kanban. I think you get the idea. There's also intermediate methodology, like between Scrum with these 4 or 5 meetings and Kanban, which has like one kind of meeting, like the backlog grooming, and two actually with a stand-up. You also have Scrumban, which Scrumban has no sprint planning, but we do have oh, I'm mistaken here. Sprint review, the demo. And Scrumban is a hybrid between Scrum and Kanban. So we do have sprint review, but we have no sprint planning. That's Scrumban. So I like Scrumban. I think when you start a new team, maybe you want to go Kanban first. Let's just have a to-do list and go. But then maybe you can add the sprint review meeting, like, oh, what have we done during the last month? And then once you're, especially you as a business analyst, once you have more stories that are ready, then you can plan a whole sprint, maybe a 1 month sprint, or maybe shorter sprints. Start with a 1 week sprint, then do 2 week sprints. Maybe you want to grow to 1 month sprints. The benefit of using Scrum, even though it's more complex than Kanban, is that that can give your stakeholder a good idea of uh, when is it going to be ready, because you have this roadmap full of items that are story pointed, and you want to know when you will get done, and then you can check your sprint velocity for your team as a whole, and you can know, oh, well, we do on average 40 points per month, so we think that we can do this much during the next sprint. All right. So I think that's it for today. We're out of time. I hope this has been useful. If there's any question, you can ask in the chat, and I can answer them. Otherwise, I think I will do another um, I will do many other webinars about business analysis and the work of the product owner. This is not an easy job. I mean, this is a manager job, right? So I think there's some great resources online, but there could be more. So stay on tune. Come to the next webinars, and follow me on YouTube and subscribe to my channel. Press the like button and share it with your friends. And there's an ebook coming up, so stay tuned. There will be a free chapter soon. So thank you for watching.